What comes to your mind when you're coming from the design end of things and you're talking about what we can't even see?
Well, I think it's an amazing opportunity. For us as designers, people love water. People want to be near water. And the question for us, I think, as we think, 8 billion is an enormous amount to do. So how can we do it cheaper, better, and more responsibly for people? And that can become an arbiter for development and rethinking how we do things. And so it's not just green infrastructure, but how we can reconstruct our neighborhoods, our cities, and our region to actually be really water responsive regions. We call it sort of water-based cities as an idea. And you can go from a building today, can be net zero water. You can have a neighborhood. We experience how we can redesign neighborhoods that we can actually cope with all the water there. Just think you woke up this morning and the first thing the news programs say, watch the flash floods, watch this with the rains coming down. Well, how can we begin to deal with that? How can we rethink? And so we can make water just this amazing amenity for us.
I think John has a great perspective here because, you know, the construction of the water systems in the United States and American cities was a great accomplishment of American democracy. And before we had these water systems, we had cholera epidemics that killed thousands of people. This did more to increase longevity of human beings than just about anything. This idea of separating where we get our water from where we put our waste. Right? So this is a great accomplishment. And by the way, we did this ahead of Europe. Usually we're often behind Europe on certain things, but in terms of this basic infrastructure, it was a great accomplishment of American democracy. And if we look at the challenge now and we say, well, it's about just preserving this system and, you know, got a 8 billion just to have the same old system we had before. No, we need to have some imagination here about having a great system, a system that's more sustainable, more equitable, that creates great neighborhoods. And, you know, so it's not, I think it can, if you're not going to excite people about just spending 8 billion to be exactly what we already have.
Right, and you know, we always say design is invisible until it fails. It's failing, right? People know, you say water's invisible. It's not invisible when it fails. And everyone's out there and they're calling the engineers and complaining and things. So what we really actually have to construct is we've got to construct the system that's visible and needed, and people will become responsive to it. And it's amazing how much ownership people take when they can get to the water. There's this amazing quote about St. Louis that says, you know, when I arrived, I couldn't find the rivers. And they were talking about the Missouri and Mississippi River. And in some ways, they're actually kind of right. Because you go and try and walk along that river, right. And we spent, you know, the last 10 years trying to develop the greenways and open the river up. But we moved away from the river. And today what we have to do is actually embrace water as a foundation for us. People love it. It's dangerous. We've got to be careful of it, but we can design it in a different way.
So this is like a radical way of, a different way of thinking. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
They're mentioning the same old system, but we have a lot of new technologies, a lot of new green technologies that we didn't have historically. And so that's something that would be great to incorporate, help advance.
So we're not replacing the system we've got. We could actually make a completely different system.
Exactly, and just the significance of having this new technology and these new types of designs that we didn't have historically. And people do get excited about that. They get excited to understand how that works and how they're improving the system and the things that they can do personally at home or even at businesses and help out in that way.
Well, in the early 20th century, there was this notion of a sort of scientific approach where everything's going to be clean, we're going to cover over the rivers, we're going to channelize them. The River de Pere was put underground. And, you know, in fact, the Choteau's Pond, there's been this effort to bring back Choteau's Pond, which would be fantastic. It's very expensive, but it would be, because I think we've hidden things away, and to bring them back and make them more visible would be great. One issue that hasn't been mentioned here is the fact that we as a region are sprawling out tremendously. We're an incredibly decentralized and thinned out region, and that makes it more expensive. So
we're stretching that system?
Oh, well, every time we're taking people, if you take a look at the urban core in 1950, what was the urbanized region, the population of that area has fallen from 1.6 million to 800,000. In other words, by half. And then we've created new infrastructure on the fringe, which is very low density, and you have long pipelines, and so it's an unsustainable approach. We can't just keep thinning out and abandoning infrastructure at the center. It's called smart growth. You know, invest in the existing infrastructure, make that work, and bring it back in a new way, right?
And so one of the things in terms of design, you won't design a rural community or a suburban community or an urban community in exactly the same way. When things spread out in the rural areas, you'll allow the water to move into retention and restore there. But in a core urban area, you'll do it differently. So in a core area like Forest Park, we brought the river back. No one knows that that's a major storage pond of water in there. If they love it, they go and sit next to it, but when it floods, it tapes with all the water, gets recycled, it gets cleansed, and the amenity of the water, which we solved a technical problem there, which was flooding. Right?
And we get recreation.
And we get
enjoyment.
recreation, we get wildlife, we get people coming to it, and we get value created. And that's the important thing as we look through this. This is why I say this is an amazing opportunity to rethink, you know? It's not like, how do we spend $8 billion to replace the pipes? It's, well, what do we get for it?
Well,
That's an important question.
I think also this idea that water is, you know, early in American history, you know, or in American cities, people used to actually purchase water from private companies. They came around with your fresh water, right? What they realized is that we're all interdependent. If somebody doesn't get clean water, if we don't have water when there's a fire, if we don't dispose of the waste properly, it will affect other people. So we do care. I care where you get your water. So it's called a public good. So we have to think not just about individual, do I turn my tap and get my water, but what sort of a vision do we have of our community and our region? How is it going to be a place that fits together so we all... And the other thing about our infrastructure in the United States and American cities is it's very egalitarian, because when you create a public system of water, a poor person in the United States, in our cities, can turn the tap and get fresh water. It's relatively inexpensive. That's a great accomplishment, because before only the rich got the really fresh water, right? So we have to maintain that sense of equity is important too. So there's tremendous public values at stake here. It's not just, do I get a commodity and turn the tap and get fresh water, right?
And I think just to add on to that, it's not just the supply of clean water, but for St. Louis, the rivers are in fact our economy. You've got the major navigation up and down the Mississippi River. When it flooded, that navigation stopped, that economy stopped. The communities on the east side had problems with their water quality. So we've gone from flood to drought to flood in 3 years. And if we're going to spend over $8 billion over the next 30 years, we also better take into account the changes in the weather patterns that are coming. And we're going to have more extreme floods, more extreme drought. We have to get out there and actually protect our water sources and rethink how we've been doing things.
You mentioned the locks and dams at the very top of the show as part of the water infrastructure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you know, we get our municipal water supply in the St. Louis region primarily from the rivers, but there are several smaller towns just outside of us that use reservoirs, and there's a lot that can be thought about the sustainability of those as well, and the droughts and floods impacted those quite a bit more than just the river, and especially the agriculture economy that we have. That was huge for that.
Huge economy in agriculture.
So before we run out of time, explain to me something we've seen a lot, the gray, and then there's all kinds of different color terminologies. And can someone make sense of this, of what we're talking
better than I.
Soft green is the same thing, meaning basically we're returning it back into a natural system. It's called sort of living with your rivers in a natural way, right? Using the role of the river to clean our water, to purify it, to store it for us, and create the amenity of it. Gray is dealing with the purification function that comes with the green infrastructure. So sometimes it's separated into soft and hard, pipes and natural systems. And quite frankly, we need a balance of both. We're not going to have one without the other. At the moment, you could argue perhaps we have a predominance of pipe and not enough of the green. And I think the new mode is actually to see how we can balance that and where it fits best within our communities.
Real quick, Todd, let's see what we have a tweet, I think that can maybe influence this conversation from Rodenbeck Emily. What can we do in our homes or neighborhoods to help our region's water infrastructure? Okay, so this is a great philosophical conversation. What's a practical takeaway?
Well, I think that beginning to become aware of not taking it for granted. So when people are doing They collection points to collect fresh water from the roof, to be aware of impervious surface, creates runoff. So I think you can begin to understand even at a very local level in your neighborhood. You know, we have areas in North St. Louis where we could save millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in this question of the stormwater and sanitary sewer by going back to the natural, because we've got land where people are not living on anymore. There's a tremendous potential. Detroit is talking about saving their system hundreds of millions of dollars by allowing some of those natural watersheds to spread out a little bit. So I think that people can, if they can understand it at a local level, maybe they'll begin. You know, I really began to understand water when I went canoeing with my daughters, and I had one of those pumps, and I had to keep pumping just to get a drink of water at the end of the day. And you began to understand, to get clean water, you can't take it for granted, right?
Also come back to Amanda's point about technology. Our technology in our own house has changed so much. Low flow supplies, everything. So the demand can be brought down at the source point. That becomes really important. You add it up, 2.5 million people, and you can actually get the demand down. So that's on the one side. And then what Todd's saying is actually coping with the flood in the place that it happens.